A big theme in the videos that I've made so far has been about the harm that various child experts can do and often are doing in our world, in my opinion. Child experts, as I'm calling them, would include child psychiatrists, child psychologists, educational consultants, and others. And just to be clear at the outset here, I'm not trying to paint too broad of a brushstroke and say that every single one of these professionals is doing harm. But I do think that there are patterns here, and there are certain ways that children have often been treated by these child experts in our society. And so I wanted to create this video both for parents, but especially for people who went through these things as kids and teenagers. And my general point is that I think that we should really think twice about what these child experts are telling us to do and how they are understanding our situation. Parents often interface with a variety of child experts that ostensibly help them with all kinds of different problems. Maybe their kid is having problems with school. Maybe they are deemed as having mental health problems. Maybe there are issues with the family. And there's generally a narrative in our culture that it's a really positive thing that parents are working with these child experts, with sentiments like it's great to get help. It must be, it's so difficult to be a parent. It must be incredibly difficult to have a kid that has all of these issues, supposedly. But I would just like to emphasize the other side to that, which is that it can actually also be an incredibly negative thing to work with these child experts, that there's potential to cause huge amounts of harm to the child and to the family and to the parents, and to waste an enormous amount of money doing so. And this happens when the child expert's understanding of the situation is totally off base, and therefore the solutions that they offer don't address the real problem, and they just cause a lot more suffering for the kid. But rather than see the child expert as somebody who has seriously wronged the kid and their family, we instead see them as these wonderful sources of support for people in need. And a big reason for this is that the harm done by the child expert is not seen as such, because there's a huge impetus to just continue to blame the kid for the results of the harm that is done for them. And often the child expert is directly involved in spinning this, in basically promoting the narrative that the harm that they caused the kid is really due to some alleged deficits that they have. This is what I experienced directly with multiple of the psychologists that I encountered, that I was basically forced to work with as a teenager. And of course, the effects of their assistance are going to be negative when they are based on these false premises. And I'm going to go into what those premises might be, some examples of them in this video. And the kids themselves are likely brainwashed by this experience and often see themselves in this very much false way that the child experts and the various adults in their lives have seen them. And I would say that people tend to carry around a lot of the shame that comes with that well into adulthood until they actually really examine it and do the work on transcending it. Now, what might these issues be and how are they misunderstood? Well, I would say they often relate to things like school, mental health issues, issues with the family. But what I want to emphasize is that in terms of the specifics of them, they can be, and I think they probably are, as varied as the lives of the people that actually experience them. And so there's a real opportunity for us to really be the experts on our own experience and be the experts on um, on all of these different dynamics. One issue that often brings child experts into people's lives is that kids are often suffering because of their family system. This is an issue that is very taboo to talk about, I think, even still. Um, and I think it's even taboo just to be aware of it, just to kind of be aware of the truth of one's experience in this regard. Even that is taboo. And I think often what's happening is parents are basically bringing their own traumas from their own childhoods. They're bringing those into their current family with their children. And they are very much in denial of this. And they have sort of become committed to a somewhat, frankly, delusional story about themselves, about their past, about their childhood. And so they don't see the harmful dynamics that are occurring in their current family system. Those dynamics that are causing the kid to suffer, that are causing a lot of emotional and psychological pain for the kid. So they don't see the kid's experience for what it is, and they instead interpret the kid's reaction to what's going on as some inherent defect that they have. This phenomenon is called the identified patient phenomenon. And just a slight tangent on this issue, the more that I have really worked on healing myself, largely by reconnecting with my own gut feelings and really being present with everything that's coming up inside of me, often which can be, very overwhelming and very difficult. The more I can see how what I always needed was an environment where it was possible to do that, an environment where I really could process all of the difficult things that come up inside of me that are just kind of a part of being human. And how what is needed for that are people who have really done that same work on themselves. And how, being surrounded by people who haven't done that can be very damaging. But it's been my experience that if parents haven't done this work on themselves, then the way that they show up for you is at the very least going to feel very off, and at worst is going to cause a lot of harm. So getting back to the core issue here, the problem is that many child experts, including, by the way, ones who are familiar with the identified patient concept and maybe use that language, will validate the parental delusions, designate the kid as mentally ill, stigmatize them, and then act to break them down to fit into that broken family system, into those dynamics that are causing them to die inside, all while maintaining this narrative that they are really helping the kid. It was my experience that the child experts always accept the parent's narrative that the kid is defective and then act to shape the kid on that basis. And I think a big part of what makes this so difficult to really heal from is that so often, probably most of the time, these mental health professionals, these child experts, actually believe this story that the kid is defective. They genuinely believe that. They genuinely see the kid in that way, even though it's totally not true. If you actually understand the dynamic of what's going on in the family, it's thoroughly untrue. But the mental health professionals actually believe that much of the time. And so when you are a young person who is seriously lacking in power and who's probably already vulnerable, emotionally vulnerable because of the things that you have been going through in your family of origin, and then you're surrounded by these mental health professionals who genuinely see you as defective, they see you through those lenses, then that's incredibly damaging and seriously warps one's view of oneself. And it's really hard not to buy into that, even if you are a kid who's extremely strong-willed, who is very much connected to yourself, very much strongly stands for what is true, for what you believe to be true about yourself and about your life. It can still be really hard not to buy into that. And I think it's probably inevitable that we will buy into it to some extent. And that's why, if we manage to survive this hell that we've been put through, it can be so empowering and profound to really be able to see these things for what they were later on, really to be able to kind of see these people for who they really were, see these dynamics for what they were and how they shaped us. I think that is, at least for me, has been incredibly healing and empowering. Now, one thing I experienced here, which I find to be extremely insidious is that multiple of these mental health professionals that I encountered would, as I mentioned, use language like identified patient, and they would speak about family systems and attachment trauma. But they were even explicit about this. Their real goal was to, break me down to fit into these harmful systems and to kind of get me to be silent and basically to subdue me. And this was a huge aspect that really was a major barrier in my own healing, because a huge part of my healing has been about having to see what actually happened and how I was actually affected by it. But it was hard to see what actually happened, which is that I was kind of broken down to fit into these broken systems, when I was being told that that's not what was happening, that they were dealing with the systemic issue, and I was the identified patient and all of that. But actually, that's not what they were doing at all. That was basically just propaganda that, in effect, prevented me from really seeing what was going on. One of the therapists I encountered as a teenager would talk about attachment trauma, but looking back on it, what they were really doing was just forcing that trauma onto me, essentially, forcing me to be condemned to a life of that conditioning. My real perspective, my real feelings, my real authentic self, I just had to abandon and bury. I largely had to just further disconnect from my real gut feelings and become, to some degree, a sort of dissociated shell of myself. And that, quite frankly, is what is so often regarded as the best therapy for a teenager. And so I don't even want to think about what might be average therapy for a teenager. Problems with school is another big reason why parents seek out child experts. For many reasons, the school system really doesn't work for a lot of kids. And here I'm just talking about the kids for whom it very visibly doesn't work. I think there are probably tons and tons of kids who really hate the school that's being forced on them. They're really dying inside because of it. And they just put on a show. They become the person that's expected of them, and they strive to get good grades, etc. One of the big reasons why the school system doesn't work for many kids is the arbitrary developmental timetables that every single kid has to meet, or else they are deemed genetically inferior, basically, and are humiliated. It's like every kid has to be able to read or catch a ball at the exact same level at the same month. And if they don't, they're assumed to be deficient. And I think this really makes no sense. And fortunately, this is an issue that more people are talking about, and there's been some great things written on it. Another major reason why school doesn't work for many kids is the extremely authoritarian nature of schooling in our society. Again, this is something that is just totally taken for granted. Our individual interests, needs, and goals are not taken seriously and are, largely disregarded. And our needs are instead interpreted through the artificial logic of that system. This extreme authoritarian control of children and teenagers is very damaging for many of them. They know that they don't like it, but they're told that they are defective for not liking it, and they better just kind of bury how they feel about it and adapt to that system. A lot of kids really don't like that they're not able to discover and develop their own real interests and real passions and really figure out who they are. And I think, especially as we start to become teenagers, there can be a real sense of crisis, because we're starting to realize that, adulthood is not that far away, but we haven't been able to figure out who we really are, what we are really about, and what maybe we really want to do in this world, and of course, what we're good at, because we've been forced into this system where that's not the goal at all. The school system, for the most part, does not care if we realize our full potential and really create a worthwhile life and career. If that were the goal of the school system, it would probably look completely different. And a related aspect of school that doesn't work for many kids is being forced to sit still indoors for crazy amounts of time. This is totally unnatural. And as with the authoritarian nature of school, it is a very, very new thing in our species. This is not something that we've been doing for thousands and thousands of years. This is something we've been doing for a much shorter amount of time. So it's a really, really strange experiment. And yet, again, we take it totally for granted. And when it damages kids and they really hate it, again, we interpret them as being defective, and we often put them on speed. We put developing brains on speed, literally speed. And there are many, many more issues with school. And so parents seek out these child experts, or these child experts are forced on them by the school system. And these parents get really freaked out oftentimes because we're led to believe that if you don't succeed at the school system, then you're going to fail at life and you're going to die poor and alone. And that is, of course, a complicated discussion. I'm not going to go into that in this video. That issue of the relationship between the school system, our economy, survival in our society, etc. But the point is, the child experts, in my opinion, tend only to see the kid's experience in terms of the logic of that system. And they only understand the kid's needs in terms of the logic of that system. They don't understand the kid's real needs. And so the kid's real experience is occurring in a total vacuum, and they are stuck in the alternate reality of the adults who totally deny the truth of what's going on. With all of these issues, whether they're school or family, these systems aren't working for us. And so we're pathologized for it. And the case that I'm trying to make is that it's not us that's broken, it's the system that's broken. And then these child experts come along and force us to adapt to that broken system and force us to see themselves through the lenses of that system, which leaves us with a lot of shame. It leaves us thinking we are deficient because that is how we are being forced to understand ourselves. And often, if we don't accept that narrative of these child experts, they just pathologize us more. But now, having really examined myself to a great extent, having healed a lot of my traumas, I'm certainly not a sage, but I've done a tremendous amount of healing. I can really see exactly how these systems are broken. And being able to really understand that and understand that in detail and understand all the layers of it has really been tremendous for my own healing. Because without that, it can be really easy to continue to buy into that story from these child experts, from these people that had power over us, that we're defective. But when I'm able to actually see exactly how these systems are broken, and I'm able to actually heal myself at a very deep level from what happened, the truth starts to become a lot more clear. And I'm able to really embody that in my life. The last point that I'm going to make is that a lot of times the kids coming out of this into adulthood can struggle with various things, right? They can struggle with maybe what our society would call mental health issues. They might struggle with things like perhaps workaholism, or maybe substance issues, or low self-esteem, various things like this. And of course, we can get the message in our culture that this makes us deficient. And what I really want to emphasize is that this really isn't an accurate way to see ourselves. Yes, we might have some struggles and some things that we have to work through, but I think what this is really about is the fact that we have been coming up against these systems that were way more powerful than us, right? Like our family system when we're kids, like the massive school system and the enormous amount of momentum behind that. And so we've had to come up against that, and that has, of course, caused a lot of damage. And so we have a great opportunity to be able to heal ourselves from this, to be able to really empower ourselves and recover ourselves. And I think that there are tremendous gifts that come with being sensitive to how these systems are really screwed up and really harmful. Yes, there are some great challenges that come with that sensitivity, but there are great gifts that come with it as well. And I think a lot of those gifts have to do with sort of being the change in our world, with helping to bring change to these systems, with bringing that awareness that is going to help us to bring necessary change. And so I think that's very cool and very exciting, even though, yes, there can be some challenges in the meantime. So I really hope that you have enjoyed this video. Please consider commenting on this video. I think it's really great for us to share all of our different perspectives on this. This is definitely not something that any one person can make sense of. I think it's really helpful when we can make sense of these things collectively, and sort of build something of a community around this. So please share your thoughts. Please consider sharing this video with anybody who you think it might be helpful for. Thank you so much for watching this all the way to the end, and I look forward to having you next time.